Hi, everybody. Um, Welcome to User Experience Auckland's Investment Fridays. For those who don't know me, my name is Haunani Powell, and I'm here today with Daniel Jordan. But for those who do know me, hello from Nani from Auckland, New Zealand. And we're just about data and design, and I won't go further than that because I got an expert right here with me. See, I'm already calling you an expert there. But let's just get started on a few things. I just want to do a bit of housekeeping um, before we go any further. One thing to talk about is that got a couple of really nice people who want to do some game nights on our UXA Discord. They're going to be managing it, and I think there's a lot of fun things. The idea is to hang out with designers and to play games and also just get to know each other. So to be looking out for those kind of events that are coming out on our Discord channel. With that said, I don't know if any of you this month went to Figma's config. It was a 24-hour extravaganza. They had people that they flew in from to San Francisco, my hometown, and did all these wonderful, amazing events that got me excited about some of the new things that Figma is doing. This here is something they had all the participants to do, and it was to create a name badge in Figma, and then you could just throw it up there. And I just had to share mine because I thought it was pretty cool myself. What I've noticed though this week is they've actually put up all their videos. So I do recommend that in between your investment Friday, take in a video too. They cut them all down. They're not very long and they are pretty cool and interesting stuff. So check it out. That's what I would say. Lastly, before I get started, is next month, yours truly is talking at 24 Hours of UX. I've been a fan of 24 Hours UX simply because I think when COVID came down, they were the first group that I knew of that did this amazing job of uh, connecting to all the local UX communities and having them talk about something and share with the community. What I'm going to be talking about is something that some of you may know, which is blockchains, NFTs, and metaverse. And that's just some cheeky thing because you have to make something kind of cute. But I am going to be talking about some of the work, some of the research, and some of the thoughts that I have about this whole space, especially with designers. And I hope that you are interested in that. And to make it sweet for you, they were really kind enough to give us some free tickets and some 50% off tickets. Now, it's $24 UX. It's like $1 per hour. And I don't think that's terribly expensive. But because you're a member of the community, if you act now at 24 hours of UX and use the codes, and there's, I'll be admit they're challenging codes because that's not how I would do them as a designer. Obviously, I have an opinion about everything. But hey, I think a free ticket is a good ticket, and $12 ticket ain't so bad either. So take a screenshot, go to that place, get yourself a ticket, and there's some really great conversations about all kinds of things. I know that one that I know of from Nova UX, which is in the States, is talking about designer interviews and salary negotiations. And I think that's actually pretty interesting and pretty relevant. So check it out. All right. So 24 hours UX. Moi is doing something there. Yay. Well, with that said, let me just move over to a new friend that I've been talking with for a few weeks now. Hey,
Yep.
Daniel Jordan. He is the design director from Dexabit. He will tell you everything he's doing there. I'm certainly don't want to steal his thunder there, but we've been having a great talk about designing for data products and just in general. He, like me, is an immigrant to wonderful New Zealand. And with that said, I'll just take it away and give it to you. Okay, Daniel?
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. I'll just share my presentation here. All right. So hopefully you can see that. There we go.
Okay, cool. Cool. I
Great.
think you got it. All right, good luck.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, I will tell you a little bit more about what I currently do uh, in a second. But what I wanted to do first, prior to that, is just take everyone back in time a little bit. 12 years ago, um, pre-COVID, um, back when we sort of all got together and shared our germs with reckless abandon. Back to 2010, where I was living in London at that time, and I was just starting out my career, really. I was an intern at the Whitechapel Gallery, and the Whitechapel Gallery is a gallery in London that specializes in contemporary art, and it's in the East End of London, so the kind of cool area of London, or at least it was at the time. Um, and it's a really nice gallery. It's in this beautiful arts and crafts building just above a tube station, Aldgate East. And a really interesting gallery, lots of interesting contemporary art going on in that space. And I did a 6-month internship there in the publications team. I studied English when I was at university, and I thought maybe my career would go into publishing. And so I worked with the small team there that published a number of different books, sort of coffee table books about various different exhibitions they had, and more academic books, like the one that I've pictured here. This one's called Sound, and it was a collection of essays about various different elements of contemporary art and sound, essays from people like Yoko Ono and John Cage. Really interesting. And what I was doing is just compiling all of those texts before I passed them on to the editors to actually do the editing work. And that was what I was doing for most of the time. But then some of the time I was also working in their online store, and they had a small online store to sell the publications that they made, and sell some of the gifts as well that they had at the gallery. And so I spent a lot of my time in the basement, and I've got a picture of the basement there, deep underground, um, packing off these orders to ship around the world. So you would get people buying um, the art books from the US and Australia, um, and also limited edition prints. And I would spend some time packing up the limited edition prints with the sort of white gloves. I've got a picture of that there too. So it was a really interesting internship, and I learned a lot of different things. As I was organizing these online sales, and I think this is maybe something that would maybe indicate where my future career would lead, I decided to start tracking the sales in a spreadsheet. I was kind of curious to know how well we were doing on a day-to-day basis. And I thought I should probably record all the sales or the revenue into a spreadsheet to see whether we were trending up or down over time, or uh, continuing on an even pace. And so what I ended up doing was creating a chart that looked a little bit like this. So, you could see the sales over time. As I'd pack these sales up, I'd go upstairs to the franking machine in the office, and I would print off a, a stamp for the package, and then I'd take it down to the post office and send it off into the world. And after a while, I thought, well, I should probably start tracking how much I'm spending on the postage and compare that to the price that the customers were paying for what they'd bought. And I started tracking that in the spreadsheet too. And my chart started to look something like this. And it was a little bit concerning. It seemed that for some sales, we were spending more on the postage than the customer was paying for the entire purchase, because we were sending these heavy art books off to the US and to Australia. And so what I did was told my supervisors, hey, have you noticed that we're paying quite a lot for postage here? And I guess, like many interns may have had this experience, the supervisors said to me, yep, okay, that's great. Just continue what you're doing. And so we just continued on, and I continued packing off these orders and sending them off into the world. And I suppose this was one of the first experiences I've had of presenting data to someone, but not really having anything come of it. And as it turns out, I think this is going to be something that sort of haunted me for some time, and has become very relevant now for what I'm doing. And I shall explain a little bit later about how I would take charts like this and make them more actionable. In retrospect, probably what I should have shown them is something that looks a little bit more like this. This is how it looks when you compare the deltas of the two different lines here. And there's been empirical studies about how to show comparisons on a chart, and showing the deltas between them makes it instantly understandable that there's a difference between the two. And here it's pretty obvious that you can see that more often than not, there is a kind of negative here, and losing money more often than not. So let's fast forward to today, and you'll see that I currently work for Dexhibit, and Dexhibit is an Auckland-based startup, and we provide big data analytics for visitor attractions. So what that means ultimately is that we aggregate data from a number of different sources. So things like ticketing systems, footfall counters, which could be cameras on the ceilings of visitor attractions that count people coming in and out of a room. We ingest data from Wi-Fi systems, even the weather, to predict and analyze visitor behavior. That's what we want really ultimately for people to be able to do. And that's useful in a number of different ways. So for the cafe and the gift shop, they want to know how many people are going to be visiting tomorrow, so they can figure out how many muffins to bake, for instance, or how much stock they should bring into the store. For the operations team, they need to know how many staff that they should be scheduling on, so that when they come into the gallery, they've made sure that they can look after everyone in the way that they need to do. So there's a whole number of ways that we can provide insight to visitor attractions to make sure that they are informed about who's visiting them. So at Dexhibit, I have the privilege of working with some of the most recognizable visitor attractions in the world. Places like the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and a number of different Smithsonian institutions as well. For instance, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is pictured at the top there. We also work with National Park Service. We work with Warner Brothers Studio Tours. We work with the Capitol Visitor Center, which is the Congress and Senate in Washington, Museum of Art and Design in New York, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And of course, more locally, can't forget, we work with lovely Motet in Auckland. So a number of really interesting customers to work with.
If,
Fascinating,
if I can just
you know.
jump in here, when
Yeah,
he showed me this, I have to say I'm like, oh, I know that place because there's Yosemite from my home, my home. There's Warner Brothers, and I'm like, I recognize a lot of these places, and I just didn't realize how a New Zealand company had so much reach. And I felt pretty proud about that. This came from New Zealand, and yet it's touching a lot of places that I've been to or recognize. And I think
yeah,
that's just a cool thing to share,
yep.
a bit of that street cred.
Absolutely, yeah. It feels like a real privilege to work with some of these customers. I mean, yeah, some of them are some of the most visited museums in the world, and have been around for hundreds of years as well. So it really feels like, yeah, a privilege to sort of talk to them and learn about how their business works, and ultimately, hopefully, help them continue into the future and make sure that they are, informed and, yeah, as efficient as possible, I suppose. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Um, I suppose from a design perspective, thinking about the users, who do we serve within those? The people that we interact with come from a wide variety of backgrounds and departments. So marketing teams, for instance, who are typically more data literate. than most users because they're kind of familiar with other analytical tools like Google Analytics or Sprout Social, those sorts of things. But then we also work with people like visitor services um, and the operations team, so helping people get through the door. Um, and yeah, it can be a wide variety of data literacy or sort of different stages of their data journey. So maybe they're new to learning how data can inform their jobs and how they might go about using the various different sources of data that sort of flows into these visitor attractions. In terms of what I do, I'm a product designer. Or I think of myself as a product designer, really, and I'm a design team of one too. So it means that I have quite a breadth of responsibilities, all the way from very early in the discovery process. I work quite closely with the product director here to figure out what customers need and want from a software, right the way through to the UI design and the testing and the delivery part of design as well. So it's a really interesting job, and I guess it's probably a dream job really for me, given my context. And yeah, really enjoy working here and doing design work. Um, yeah, I should say I also work with a great team of engineers, data analysts, data scientists, doing some incredibly difficult and complicated things. And so it's a really interesting from a technical point of view as well, how we kind of ingest and then analyze all of this data. And there's some fascinating technology happening within Dexibit. Yeah. I wonder if it's a good juncture. Is there any questions popped through? Did you?
Sure. Actually, this is a question from Steven UX. By the way, he's the same Steven I was telling you about that's doing game nights on our Discord.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
But he asks, how has COVID-19 affected Dexibit's mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. COVID-19 did definitely affect Dexibit, but not necessarily our mission. So our mission remains the same. We want to empower places people love to visit. It just meant that that changed slightly when COVID came. So I'll actually, as we proceed through, I'll give you a great example of how we responded to the challenges of COVID for visitor attractions.
Okay.
But yeah, it definitely did change the landscape in a lot of ways. Obviously, they many visitor attractions closed during that period of time. But I guess there is always a need to understand the environment that they're operating in. And as we go through the example, you'll see that there's some very specific needs that they had. And so that provides us an opportunity. How can we transform our product to better engage with the issues that they're facing? And I think that'll always be the case, that as new challenges pop up, and I guess potentially if we're going to a recession, there'll be new challenges as well. And I suppose what we hope to do is be as responsive as possible to the challenges and just better provide information to our customers so that they can make decent decisions as they go about their lives. Yeah.
Okay, so Stephen, we'll probably answer your question as we go through the topic.
Mhm.
And if anybody else has a question, just pop it in the chat and we'll get to it when we can. Okay?
Awesome. I thought I wanted to talk a little bit about what Dexibit does and the sort of data product context in general. And I think about Dexibit as a data product, by which I mean the primary goal of a data product, I think, is providing actionable insights at scale. Um, so the actionable part, really, um, we want our customers to be able to go out into the real world and action something because of what they've seen through our product, whether that's, as I say, baking more muffins or scheduling on more staff. We want them to have tangible actions that happen in the real world. And I suppose that's one of the things with the example I gave of the Whitechapel Gallery. How do we kind of encourage those actions in the real world is a kind of design problem that we're thinking about. And then the scale aspect as well is really important for a data product, in that what we aiming to do is build, I suppose, pre-canned visualizations, data visualizations, that will work for a number of different scenarios, a number of different customers. So we don't typically do sort of consultancy work where we'll do one-off visualizations or just work with one data set. What we really care about as a business and as a data product is how can we solve these problems at scale? So how can we build a visualization that's going to work equally well for one client or another? And that scale is where the complexity comes in, and that's where I think design really has a part to play. So some apps like Dixibit are almost purely data products, and I think a great example that we'll all be familiar with is Google Analytics. So they too also have a range of pre-canned visualizations that one can use, and that's used in a variety of different contexts, from e-commerce stores or catalog sites and those sorts of things, even in apps. So it's a kind of similar concept in that primary function really for us is to provide actionable insight at scale. But I think even beyond purely data products, most products that we interact with probably have some sort of data product somewhere within them. And a great example in the kind of consumer landscape, Sharesies, brilliant app. When you log in on their homepage, they have a chart that you can, see your investments going up or going down, as they are at the moment. And you've got other things, your KiwiSaver. When you land on that, you have a chart, and also business apps as well. Typically when you land in a business app, you'll land on some sort of dashboard where you have some sort of chart, maybe showing your sales over time, that sort of thing. And so even within other apps that may not think of themselves as data products, there are elements of data products in there too. And I think what I'm about to talk about will just be really interesting for those people, and maybe, hopefully, maybe reorient the way that you think about interacting with that element or designing for that element of a product. So data products, I think, pose some interesting challenges for designers. One of which I think is that the goal of the product, so the action that we're hoping people will take, happens outside of the product. So within our product, there isn't anything to kind of action necessarily. What we're doing is we're informing people so that they can go out in the world to action. And so that makes it quite hard for us to measure the goal. So here's a kind of typical example of something that we might provide to our customers. It's showing the average footfall. Footfall is how many people enter a particular space over the course of a week. So if we take a month, for instance, we can see that the Saturdays and Sundays are the sort of busiest 2 days. But there's also an interesting insight here in that Monday is also busier than average. And so what we're hoping people will do after looking at this is go out into the world and say, okay, well, we need to schedule more staff on a Monday. And ideally, what we're hoping to do is provide them with some sort of surprise or insight, something that they had never learned before. And what will happen is when they're interacting with this, we'll see them mousing over, the chart, and they might be looking at the tooltips and having great insight that they'll go on to tell their board and finding out great things. But those sort of interactions also look very similar to someone that might be upset about what they're seeing. Maybe the data doesn't make any sense to them. Maybe they're usually very quiet on a Monday and they just can't quite figure out why this could be the case. And their interactions kind of look very similar. Or maybe they just simply don't understand what they're seeing. Why is it showing that what does this chart even mean? And for more complex visualizations, I suppose that's the biggest design challenge, in that we don't necessarily know whether they're fully understanding what they're seeing. And those interactions all look very similar, really, when you start to analyze them with tools like Google Analytics, or screen recording software like Hotjar or Full Story. And um, yes, great aha moments for our customers can look very similar to complete confusion. And so that makes it very difficult to use these quantitative tools to figure that out. The other thing that makes data products challenging, I think, is that the sort of classic model of quantifying the user experience, that's written in the book called Quantifying the User Experience, of efficiency, effectiveness, and satisfaction. So efficiency being, how easy it is to, or how quickly one can do a particular goal. Effectiveness, how frequently they are achieving a positive goal, and then satisfaction, how they feel about it afterwards. These things are very difficult to apply to data products, because we don't necessarily want them to gain insight quickly necessarily. Or how do you gauge what a quick result is to gain insight? One of the interesting things about our product is that we're hoping people build up a bigger picture by interacting with many different insights at the same time, that they can then go on and action in the real world. And so this model of efficiency, effectiveness, satisfaction maybe doesn't quite apply, or we have to think about it a little bit more carefully as we're going on to design. So all that results in is, as a designer, I need to create a really robust process to ideate, prototype, and test data products prior to sort of putting them in production or putting them in front of customers at scale. And by creating this really robust design process, this ensures that what we're building here is well used. So people are looking at these visualizations regularly and getting good insight from them. We want them to be well understood as well. So when people are interacting with them, they are understanding them correctly and getting the correct insight from them. And then finally, we want them to be actionable. It adds value to our customers' businesses. We want them to be able to go and action something in the real world that will then ultimately add value to them. And I think for a product, if our customers are doing something that's valuable, that means that they'll want to continue to invest in our software, and we'll kind of continue to go on. So I think these three things are the most important things for me to achieve from a design perspective. So what I want to do then is take you on a bit of a story about one of the first projects that I worked on at Exhibit, to kind of explore a little bit about how we initially started building or designing data products, and talk about some of the things that I learned from that along the way as we built up this project. And so this is where we can talk about COVID-19 and visitor attractions. So obviously, as I said, during the first kind of phase of that, when people were locked down, visitor attractions were closed a lot of the time, and very worrying time for visitor attractions. But what we started to see after a while was that attractions were able to open, and as it turns out, some studies showed that actually it was probably one of the safer environments for people to be able to engage in. But in the United States, particularly where most of our clients are, there were state level restrictions on how many people could be in a space. So the days of a packed museum, and I think this is the Louvre here, people looking at the Mona Lisa.
I was wondering about that. I'm going,
Yeah,
I feel I have been there one day in my youth.
and seeing this almost makes you cringe, really, doesn't it? People
Hmm.
packed in so closely just seems a little surreal now to think back. But yeah, as I say, there were sort of mandates from the state about how many people you were allowed in a specific space, and typically, by the square foot. So you're allowed X number of people in a square footage. And so that meant for the visitor attractions that we worked with, they had to be very careful about how many people they let in to a particular room, and whether there was any bunching within those spaces. How quickly are people flowing through those spaces to make sure that there was no breaches of the occupancy allowed in that room. All of these provided really interesting challenges for visitor attractions that had never really thought about these things before. And what that provided Exhibit was an opportunity to go out and help them by visualizing the data that we had. And we collect data about how much or how many people are in specific spaces. And we started to work on a project about how we might go about visualizing this. So what we thought we would do is we would create, for every day that the attraction was open, a column on a chart that showed from between 0, when the room was empty, and 100% capacity, when the room would be full. And so the number of people you're allowed in the space we were calling the capacity. And what we thought we would do then is mark on the chart the occupancy, how many people are on average during the course of that day were in that space. And so here you can see that the room on average over the course of the day was 50% full. The next thing we thought we might do on this column is mark on the column what their maximum was. So did they ever reach, or what was the maximum occupancy that they reached over that period of time? And you can see here they reached at a certain point in time 75% occupancy. And then the final thing we wanted to show is when the maximum occupancy went over the capacity of the room, we could mark on that chart that in red that they had breached, and we can, as you can see, the max occupancy has popped out over the top there. And so what I did as a designer was then, okay, I'm going to put this into Figma and we're going to prototype this and take it out to our users to test and figure out whether we've got the right thing. And I kind of diligently went into Figma, drew up all of my charts using rectangles, and then took this prototype, this larger prototype, out to test with users. And from the testing that we did, it looked pretty good. And so we kind of proceeded to the build phase, where we started to work initially with mock data, and then towards the end of the process connected it up to the APIs that we were building, that's kind of aggregating all of this data and doing the calculations. And then finally, the two came together and we were able to see the product that we built. And I can show you some examples of what that looked like. So this is based on real data. It's slightly modified, but you can see here that this customer, for instance, has largely, on average, the occupancy is under the capacity of the room, but on this particular day, they've breached the capacity. And this is the kind of ideal world. But the interesting thing with data is that it's not always as you might expect. Sometimes the data doesn't come through as you might like. Sometimes there is no data at all for whatever reason, and sometimes it presents you with odd situations that you hadn't necessarily factored in. So here's an example of maybe where things didn't work so well. So here is maybe this is a gift shop or something, where the capacity is quite small, but then the demand for the occupancy is quite high. So gift shops are always one of the busiest places in a visitor attraction. And you can see here that they have breached by some way their capacity. And I would say that this is probably one of the lesser effective charts, because a lot of the information happens in the bottom fifth, I suppose, of the chart, and it becomes very difficult to track the max occupancies here. back to their columns. And it's probably also not providing anything that they don't already know, right? I think they're probably well aware how busy it is in their gift shop. So this was one of the less successful examples. And probably what didn't occur to me as well when I was prototyping in Figma is how things might look um, when expanded out to view a larger time frame. So this is a couple of months worth of data. And on the one hand, this tells some really interesting stories, right? We can see that initially during June, July, uh, they're potentially really struggling with the capacities and breaching the capacity all the time. But as time goes on, the red columns become less and less, and the capacity is slowly um, being utilized correctly. And there's just a few breaches, which I would hope that they would then go on and analyze, okay, well, why mid-October did we have a couple of breaches there, and how can we prevent that from happening in the future? So what this meant was, and I think in general, this was a successful project for us, and I think we provided some real value for those customers at that time. But from a design perspective, I was left with an uneasy feeling, I think. My prototypes weren't really doing what they were supposed to do. Prototypes for me are supposed to help you make learning really early in the process, um, to figure out all the different scenarios that you might have to cater for. And my end user testing wasn't necessarily validating the ideas that we had. And my uneasy feeling was this is going to catch me out at some point in time. Right? We might not always be so successful when we come to build this product. So what I felt like I needed to do was find a better way to prototype with real data much earlier in the design process. And I also needed to find a better way to test data visualizations. And all of these things, if I was able to succeed in this, would allow me to build visualizations that were not just interesting, but then actionable as well. And so what I want to do is show you a few tools that I have found through the course of my sort of exploration to try and solve this problem of how to prototype with real data. Because I think one of the most important things that we do in the data product space, I suppose, is design with real customer data in mind in our prototypes. And I think this is probably one of the things I realized. I started off thinking that data products were maybe unique in this respect, but I think this is actually quite a common design problem, and I think it's something similar to the issue of designing websites, for instance, where you're designing with lorem ipsum text, and your design looks great with lorem ipsum, and then you come to get the real content, and when you put it in, it's much different than you expected. And this is kind of, I think, a sibling of that that issue where when you come to put the real data in, it looks different to what you expect. And the solution to both is bringing in the real information as early as you can in the prototyping stage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few different things, but is there any questions? No questions so far.
Yep.
All cool, all good. All right, what I will do is I'll share my screen again. I'm just going to share my browser.
You know, one of the things that you were saying about sharing the data, real data, to help make good design decisions, and having that issue where you design with lorem ipsum, with fake data. And I have to say that I have met designers, or I have worked on projects where it feels uncomfortable. Um, this was for this story. I was working with a young designer, and we came up with something. And what she noticed is that I had actually wrote things. I don't know if I would say it was real data, but it was a point of view of that design of what that could be, what that
mm,
page could be. And I guess the reason why I always remember it is because she's like, "But Nani, we're designers, we don't write the content." And so there's this little feeling I think designers get about that's taboo. That's not something you can really go into and um, explore as part of the design. And my response with her was, well, the thing is that we are designing that user experience, and we're designing what we think should be in what people should see. And so we have to have a point of view. We have to we have to say what we think would work well there, for the client to understand or to make a decision about the data that they have or the content that they do have. And so we do have to we have to go beyond the use of lorem ipsum,
mm,
um, in that point of view. And then and that's exactly what I did. Um, and the outcome of the project was that the client could see what when I told the story of why you want to put this in here, they could see it.
mm,
And I think that's the thing about design, is that it's not just the colors and it's not just the layout, but really content's always the thing that gets a person to come back to a product. And you have to think of what
mm.
that content would say. So
Yeah, and uncomfortable is the right word really, because what you're doing is you're breaking out of this linear process where you do the design and then you hand it to the engineers and they build it, and then you put it out to the customer. You're sort of breaking that kind of comfortable flow up, and actually you're saying, well, I need to go to the content writers, or you're going to the engineers in my case to sort of figure out how we're going to get the data, and you're sort of mixing up the process, and it stops happening in this comfortable line, and it's kind of a little bit more messy, or I suppose I like to think of it as kind of loops of
mm,
improvement. um, and it means you have to get off your desk as well. You have to go and talk to the engineers, and you have to go and talk to people. um, but through that process of collaboration, that's where you start adding value and start going beyond. Um, you start going beyond just
mm.
a kind of basic design. You start really adding quality to what you're building. Um, so yeah, and I'll sort of talk a little bit about in a second about breaking down those boundaries and working closer with engineers. I just wanted to check that you can actually see my browser.
Oh, pardon me. Does that sound right? Look right? Okay, there you go.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yep. All right. So first thing I wanted to show was my original prototype here in Figma. And as you can see, yeah, I was just using rectangles and things. I think this is probably a cardinal sin of
You know what my
data
face was
product
telling
design.
you, right? I was like, I wonder if he componentized that.
Yeah. Oh no, I didn't. Yes, and yeah, you'll be horrified to see these.
I'm not
Um,
looking.
yeah. So yes, and I think if you took anything away from this presentation, it's that if you're building a data product, or you will use real customer data to put into your prototype and test with that, and ideally a variety of different customers' data, because that's how you're going to get to the best designs.
So how are
Um,
you doing that? Are you using a plugin?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that I found of doing that. And Figma does have some plugins, which I can show you here. So there's one called Chart, which allows you to create a chart through a little plugin, um,
Oh,
which I hope will work. Oh, I don't need help. And yeah, it allows you to plug in a variety of things. So I have 3 lines, and it allows you to put random data in, which I'll talk about in a second. And we can show a preview here. All right, so we've got a chart that we've made, but I think the danger here is this random tab, right, which is something that I implore you not to do, because as designers, we want to make something that looks really pretty and looks cool on the page, but that's not necessarily how the data is going to be when it pops out in real life. And so this alluring random tab, or you can do trend down, or or distribution, makes
Right.
really pretty charts, but it doesn't make great prototypes for us to go out and test with users. It does have the ability to add in data in a table, which is kind of cool. And you can use JSON if that appeals to you as well. But I would say that there is a better version of this, which you probably already have. It's just not as sexy and cool as Figma, and it is called Excel or Google Sheets. Like, Google Sheets, Excel does exactly the same thing, if not better, right? Because you can add calculations to the cells. You
Right.
can, you can do any number of things, pivot tables. And then when you actually get the visualization at the end, you can edit it with the editor, and you can change the thickness of the lines or the axis labels, all of those different things you can do through Google Sheets. And I spend a fair amount of my time actually making charts with Google Sheets that are effectively prototypes with customer data prior to prior to, to the build time. One of the things I like about using Google Sheets is that it gives you a good gauge of the value as well of what you're building. Because
Hmm.
if it takes me 2 minutes to just quickly put some data in a spreadsheet and then create a chart from it, it's probably a good indication that we're really not doing enough to add value into that visualization, and we're not telling a good enough story. One of the biggest competitors, we believe, for Dexibit is just the Excel table or the spreadsheet, because a lot of businesses, and this is true of many B2B apps, I would say, is that a lot of businesses run on Excel, and it's often very difficult to claw people away from the comfortable spreadsheets that they use, and use a much more robust software. And so if it takes a little while to build up a prototype in Google Sheets, that means to me that we're actually building something of value, because it's going to be saving our customers time, and it's going to be allowing them to find insight that they might not otherwise have the ability to create themselves.
Hmm.
So yeah, Google Sheets is a really good tool to prototype. It doesn't feel as cool as using Figma, but I strongly recommend it. And you can even export. You can download PNGs, but you can also download a vector SVG, which you can paste straight into Figma as well. So you can combine the two if you really wanted to. Um,
Okay.
so I was happy with those, but they're quite static. And if you're sharing them with customers, they can't interact with them in any way. And one of the interesting things about data products is that the user can interact with them, mouse over them, start to explore the data. And so I was hoping to find a way to sort of simulate that as well in their experience. And that led me to find a couple of different technologies that I've since used. So the first is a software called Observable. Now, Observable is a tool that's typically aimed at analysts, data analysts, and business analysts, that sort of thing. Um, and it's a notebook tool, which is kind of familiar for those that have knowledge of data science, that sort of thing. You would create charts or upload data, firstly, and then create data visualizations within those to sort of explore the data within a sort of notebook format. Um, and Observable requires a little bit of coding knowledge. It's based in JavaScript, and so if you have some web skills, web design, or web development skills, then you'd be able to interact with Observable. And I think if you're just learning some coding skills as well, I think Observable is a really great way to learn JavaScript too. So if you're kind of curious about it, it's a really nice, safe environment to kind of learn some coding skills and sort of see the results in real life presented to you. So I thoroughly recommend it. So this, what we're seeing here, is a chart that I created in Observable, which is taking some data about the distance from the distance a visitor has traveled to a particular visitor attraction, so that you can see the sort of banding from particular cities around the world. So um, various different I say around the world, around America, so you can mouse over it and see where all these visitors are coming from, and the more visitors there are, the darker the lines, because it's overlaying different transparencies. And so what I like about this is it provides an interactive way for the prototype. You can get a real feel for how it's going to look in real life once it's built, more so than a static prototype that you might use. And the other good thing about it as well is it's a little bit more scalable than Google Sheets, in that you can do all the calculations within the notebook, and then you can just upload different data sets and it will redo the chart for you. And so it kind of provides an option. One of the things, if you're thinking about prototyping with real data and using third-party systems, is that you might be concerned, depending on your scenario, about uploading customer data to third-party software, and that's completely valid. But I don't think it's the end of the road for services like Observable, because there are ways around that where you can either run your own instance of Observable, because it's all open source, so you could host Observable yourself if you were so minded to do so. And you can also sort of extract just the chart component and provide the data within your sort of secure area. So some of these things might require you to work with your engineering team to produce. And I guess this sort of talks back to what we were chatting about earlier. One of the things in order to prototype well with data is that, yeah, you may have to interact with engineers in order to get there. But that's a great thing for the product that you're building, because it brings the engineers in early into the discovery process and helps them understand the problem. And as you'll know, if you've worked with engineers, they're some of the most creative people you can work with, and they'll provide you with some excellent ideas and ways that you might even improve your own designs. So bringing engineers in early in the process is a benefit, really, and not a hindrance. The final technology I wanted to show you was something called Plotly. And Plotly is a tool that we're actually using internally within Dexibit to prototype our data currently. The reason that I show Plotly is that it's more appealing if you have data analysts and data scientists within your team, because it can be used using Python, which is a language that data scientists, data analysts typically feel more comfortable with. And so they're able to create, using Python, prototypes for you potentially that similarly can be interactive, so that you can recreate the experience of a data visualization. So those are some tools that I have found interesting through my sort of exploration of how to prototype with real data. The other thing that I wanted to solve, and I'm just going to flick back to my my presentation. Whoops.
Second tab.
uh, all right, should be able to see. Yeah, I wanted to start thinking about how users interact with data when they're presented with the data visualization. And I think it's slightly different how users interact with data visualizations than they do when they are interacting with sort of functional products, like an e-commerce store or something like that. I think, yeah, data visualizations, in terms of the way people understand them, are very different. But fortunately, there is a lot of understanding of this and a lot of academic study done about this because scientists are interested in how people understand visualizations because scientists use data visualizations a lot in what they do in their academic studies. And so I want you to consider this quote from an academic paper that was written in 1997 by Preeti Shah. Um, the paper is called a Model of Cognitive and Perceptual Processes in Graphical Display Comprehension. Very catchy title. Um, so she wrote that the time it takes to form even a simple interpretation of some graphs in our studies can be about 30 seconds, or the same amount of time as reading and understanding a paragraph of text, rather than the time to, say, recognize an object. So what that means for me as a designer is that when I place a data visualization in front of a user, it's going to take them some time, probably longer than 30 seconds really, to comprehend what they've seen and understood, if not longer. And so this sort of helped me understand why when I was showing visualizations to some users, I often didn't get the greatest responses from them because potentially they were struggling to understand or comprehend what they were seeing. Um, Potentially they maybe didn't understand it and told me that it was interesting, but hadn't fully kind of gleaned what was being shown in the data. And so as I go through my test process, I'm very conscious of the differences for data products and data visualizations. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about how interpretations of data inform, what we're putting into our products.
So can I ask, how has this, you say you test, you show data visualizations with your
Yep.
participants, as you're testing, but you know that um, as you're going through this, it will take some time
Mm.
there, and this is, the first time they see it, right?
Yep.
Because you're measuring habituality
Mm.
to your product. So how has this modified your testing behavior,
Mm.
right?
Yeah,
Because you have to be patient to to really get through it.
that's right. Yes. Well, what I'll show you actually is how I've managed to tie these all together. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and give you a sort of idea of the procedures that we use here at Exhibit, which are by no means perfect, and it's something that we're continuing to evolve as our understanding of the domain increases. Um, but yeah, we've found a way to sort of tie it all together. Um, the way that we've approached it is that we um, worked as a team to think how can we enable ourselves to test better earlier in the process. And we approach the problems as a team, so engineers, designers, product managers alike at the same time. And we're thinking about how can we prototype early. And what we ended up doing was building within our app a new module for data products, data prototypes. And we call this module experiments, and we can kind of switch it on or off for our users. And then within this module, what we have is a list of different prototypes that we might be exploring at any one point in time. And then finally, what we do within those prototypes is add a prototype chart using Plotly. This sort of this simulates the sort of interaction um, that a user might have with an actual chart within our product. Um, so it's not a static chart like you might expect in Figma. It's interactive, but it's limited in some respects in that you can't change the date range, for instance, to kind of go back to last year and have a look. The date range is kind of fixed because it's based on a fixed data sort of set. And you can't add in sort of filters that you would typically in our products as well. So in our product, you can filter by various different things, the room or the venue, that sort of thing. So you can't interact with it in that way, but it does approximate what the user will see once they um, use it in the product. And
So
so
is
what?
this is
Yeah,
this during the testing or is this part of the product, but it's an experimental area that they can engage with?
it's part of the product that we've sort of incorporated into our testing process. So
Oh,
what I would
okay.
typically do is once we've created a prototype, and we can create those prototypes reasonably quickly, like it could be half a day or so. There's not a lot of engineering overhead to get something into this area.
Hmm.
I will typically provide it to the user prior to me meeting with them, so that I'm not sort of doorstepping them during the testing process. And that sort of allows them to experience the data as they would in real life in their dashboard and kind of interact with it in some way. Um, and then when I come to sort of interview them, which I'll kind of line up after sending it to them, I can then go in and start to talk about how they've sort of interacted with it. Um, and so when I
Mm,
go into that interview, there's three key things that I wanted to talk about amongst many things. Um, The first is that I want to get them in some way to explain their understanding of the visualization. So explain to me your understanding of this visualization. Um, and I guess depending on your sort of interview technique or sort of the persona that you have, you kind of pitch this question differently. But ultimately, you want to kind of get them in a comfortable space where they can sort of tell you what they understood of that visualization. Um, and that helps us just identify whether what they've seen is the correct interpretation. And one of the things when you're working with data visualization is what's called the curse of knowledge. So when you're deep in the subject matter, you will often fully understand what a chart is showing you, and you kind of get it. And whenever you see it, you instantly understand. But often when you present it to a new person, and I imagine people watching this may have felt this during the course of this when they've looked at a data visualization, it takes a while to kind of understand those things. And so what you're making sure is that when they're telling you back what they understood of it, it is the correct interpretation of what you're hoping that they see. Or if they've misunderstood it, then how do I make my design different to kind of account for that? Um, I'm interested to know whether anything surprised them about what they saw, because if what we've presented through our prototype is unsurprising to them or something that they already know, there's a kind of indication that value is not present. You know, we don't want to be just showing people stuff that they already know. We want to surprise them with the data that we've provided. And then the final question, and I think this is the most important thing for my sort of topic, because we want to go beyond interesting, because we want to see something actionable, we can ask them, what did you do after seeing it? Did you go on to do any actions in between you seeing this visualization and me talking to you? And we get some great responses from that. And I want to take you through a particular example that we've been testing recently. So one of the things that we found post-COVID is that a lot of visitor attractions are leaning into ticketed attendance as opposed to just having people walking up to the door. And as a result of that, our customers are kind of interested in when people book tickets to see their visitor attraction, um, how far in advance. And we can figure that out quite easily with their ticketing data. And we've been testing out a chart that looks a little bit like this, where
mm,
you've got, here you can see for this particular one, around 60% or so, 60% of their bookings have come on the same day as they're attending the venue. And then most of it, 90% of that came within 7 days of the booking. So they would visit within the week that they booked the ticket. And we've been testing this with our customers. So we've been going, sending it to them in advance and asking them. And one of the more memorable ones in terms of actioning what they have seen, you know, when we asked them, they said, it's really interesting. We were just wondering about this at the moment. And as a result of this, we realized we were initially going to expand the booking window on the website and work with their web web developers to expand the booking window to 3 months. But having seen this prototype, what we're now able to think is maybe we won't continue with that project. And so that's exactly the sort of thing that we want to validate when we're testing these prototypes, is that having seen the real customer data, having seen
Hmm.
data that is relevant to them, we can kind of validate that they have done some sort of action in the real world. And, you know, hopefully they've saved some money or saved some time that they're able to spend in other ways and sort of have a real effect in the world. And
Yeah.
so that's the sort of design insight, really, that from a design perspective we're looking for when we're testing these prototypes. So that's the sort of process we're using, and as I say, it's an evolving process as well, um, and requires, I think, continual process and practice, and being mindful of, often people will sort of revert back to the linear process of sort of design and then engineering. And so we're continually trying to think, okay, how can we collaborate better? How can we test earlier upstream in the process to make sure that we're getting the most useful validations before we commit to building something?
Right.
And I think it's proving really successful at the moment. So hopefully I've gone from the full arc from 10 years ago, 12 years ago, not being able to presenting data but not getting any action from it, to a process whereby we can actually achieve some actionable results in the real world. And I guess, what does this mean for the viewers of this presentation? I've got 3 key takeaways really that you should think about. So firstly, if a process is not working, or you feel that a process is not going to give you the most feedback early in the process, change that process, even if that means changing tools, even if it means leaving the comfortable design tools that we use on a daily basis, and explore the world for other tools that might exist there. Secondly, ideate, prototype, and test with real data. So the earlier that you can introduce real data from your customers into your prototypes, the better the results that will come out of it. And then finally, consider how your testing procedures should evolve to accommodate the nuances of data visualization. So data visualization is a kind of niche area, but if you're providing data visualizations to your users, there is a wealth of information about how one can create great data visualizations, and think about your testing procedures to ensure that when you're getting feedback, it's useful and honest feedback from your customers.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I've provided a list of resources, like a very short list of things that are interesting to come from here.
You should take a screenshot, folks.
Take a screenshot, and I can share it. I can share it as well, all the links in the Discord
Oh,
later as well.
okay, that would be great. I do have a
And
question for you.
yeah, fire away.
Um, Mr. Brendan Millar asks, also, how has it modified the way you think about designing a tool which naturally gives them the pause needed to understand the information being presented?
Yes, how has it modified the way that I think about designing a tool?
And Brendan, what is the it? I'm thinking it's the process, but
Hmm.
I'm not sure if you can hit us up again what that is. But
Yeah.
what does that say to you?
Um, I don't know whether it's I suppose one of the things we think about here, and it's not a problem that we've necessarily solved, but one of the things is that when you engage with a data product, you're building up a picture, a larger picture about the world, um, and you don't necessarily receive that picture from a single visualization. You're looking at multiple different inputs and building this picture of the world. And and that does provide a challenge, right? I think ultimately for the process, that means that I just have to engage with customers even more, and not necessarily rely on those quantitative tools. So constantly checking in with the customers.
He did add that was in reference to the
Yeah,
insight about how it takes 30 seconds to gain any insight from the visualization.
yeah, yeah,
It sounds like a bit of the question I
yeah,
asked you about how you
yeah.
put
That's
that
right. Mm,
into your
yeah,
testing time.
yeah. And I think my advice would be, don't sort of doorstop people with something that they've never seen before and um, expect to have any sort of value given back to you in your interview. Many a time you can just sort of put a chart on the page and say, hey, have a look at this. What do you think? But the issue with that is that oftentimes, they're probably looking at it and thinking, oh, I don't know about this. Certainly for me, I take a little time to think about things. It takes me a little bit of time when I was looking at this question, right? I need to think about things deeply. Um, and so often people will probably make up a response, right? They might say, oh yeah, no, that's interesting. And
Mhm.
it might be just an indication that they haven't fully understood it. They might be bluffing a little bit. And so you just have to be very mindful that you're presenting something that you've seen a lot and are familiar with, but they are not familiar at all. And so if you put something on a page and expect a valuable response back, you're probably going to be disappointed, or even worse, you get a response that's misleading. And so that's why, for me at the moment, I'm favoring sending things in advance so that people can interact with it in their own time. Um, and you kind of get interesting results from that. So talking to one customer, um, uh, or rather, I sort of had a meeting with four people from a particular visitor attraction. Um, I was able to track in our analytics tools that only two people had seen this prototype that we put in there, but all four people in the room had seen the prototype and understood it, right? And that was an interesting insight, in that they were able to share this prototype, maybe through a screenshot or something like that, and interact with it. And that was a kind of fascinating way of thinking about it. And that experience wouldn't have been possible had I not shown them prior. So yeah, I think being able to, you know, give them enough time, doesn't have to be days before. It could be, an hour before your meeting, that sort of thing. Or, within the interview, if you're setting up a procedure maybe for someone else to test, and this might be common at maybe larger software companies than mine. If you're sort of handing off this procedure to researchers, maybe within the course of that procedure, they view the chart first, and then in 10 minutes time they're able to come back to it. Um, yeah.
If I can add to that, because I think um, whenever I've had to test something where you do look at data, or you're trying to, I step them through. Whenever they get to that part of the tasks,
Yeah.
I will always give them time. You have to be patient whenever you're
Mm,
testing people, but I'll do a mixture of you know, um, asking questions where they can have a good answer, in the
mm,
sense of like, how many of these things are above 75%. So then it
yeah.
just tells them, oh, I got to count. But then in doing so, they'll sit there and really think. Um, that's how I've handled those
Mm,
complexities. But I have to say, I like the idea of, well, I'm just going to send that to them beforehand and let them acclimate on their own, because
yeah.
that's a realistic human behavior anyway, right? That's
That's right. Yeah. And
so
and
yeah.
one of the things I'm conscious of, it's yeah, you have to be a very good interviewer not to kind of give someone that's struggling hints on what they're seeing. But within our product, they're not getting any external help, right? They're just seeing something on a page. And so
Yeah.
what we want to do is replicate that in a test scenario where they're not getting any external information.
Yeah. But I think that's actually pretty cool and perhaps a way that it's a good different way of approaching testing um, you know, kind of these complex visual uh, data visualizations.
Mm.
But just, in the course of how you do testing, user testing, I think it's a different way that you could use in other things as well.
Yep.
It's neat,
Mm.
in it's something to consider. But like I said, it's how you set your protocol up and how you introduce them and how you step them through
Correct.
to give people the time to kind of take it in and be
Yeah,
patient.
absolutely.
Always
Yeah.
be patient.
Yeah,
That's your
for sure.
job, is
Just
really to be patient.
yeah, give people the space for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right. Have we come to the end? I'm not sure, but it looks
Yeah,
like it
no,
with you and the,
that
so
is exactly right. The only other thing I have is really just to thank you, Nani, for you've given me some great feedback along the way, and thanks to UXA, and also thanks to my team as well. Have been very helpful, sort of in the early stages of this, and very supportive of me. So I really appreciate that too. So yeah,
well,
thank you very much.
I definitely you're welcome, and I would like to just thank you as well for putting in the time. I didn't know your company before, and I appreciate the thoughts and the work that you put into to really kind of explore something that's a bit challenging, I think, on normal days. And it's not
Absolutely.
necessarily something that I think we designers think about in our products, because we don't always have things where we would see this, and like, we don't all work for Google Analytics, and the closest that we would have is a dashboard.
Hmm.
And you know that's always a challenge of how do you think how you would test that and put that in there. But I think the key takeaways that I learned was, try to use real data and test that often and early. Work with your developers, your technical staff, collaborate, which I think is good. You don't want to do this, throw it over the fence and get something done. That's so waterfall 2003. You really do want to have more of that collaboration approach. Um, and I like with the testing, giving some time and being patient, but also sharing some things before you test. Um, Even if it's an hour ahead of time, just to give people a chance
Mm.
to take those things in. So those are like some of my big takeaways, and I really appreciate uh, what you've been sharing here. Um, I'm wondering, how is Dexibit doing? Are you guys looking for people? Do you want to share any of that?
Yeah, no, that's right. We're currently looking for a data science director, so to work in the data science team, work with me and the engineers here. And so, yeah, we are currently looking for that, interviewing at the moment. So, yeah, it's not too late to apply if if you're a data scientist or know any data scientists that are particularly interested in the product domain and how we can bring data science to customers and have a real impact on visitor attractions, some really cool visitor attractions, then yeah, please do um, let me know.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Um, since we're coming to the end, before any more questions, otherwise, thank you so much, Daniel. It was a real pleasure to get to know you and have some. We've
My
had some
pleasure.
interesting conversations when you guys aren't looking, and getting to know each other. And so I really do appreciate you sharing your mana, and also just sharing something you feel very passionate about as a designer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And and I know I'm not the only one that now uh, knows your company and will be keeping an eye on you in
Yes,
LinkedIn. Uh,
absolutely. Yeah,
that's the best way to find Daniel Jordan, by the way, is on
yeah,
LinkedIn.
that's right.
Um, so if you want to, reach out to connect with him, especially if you are a person who's interested in that design director job. Wait, I'm sorry, it was data science director job.
That's right.
A-
Yeah.
And and other than that, we thank you guys for coming and investing in yourself. There's a
Mm.
lot of information here. I think you gotta give yourself at least 30 seconds to take it all in.
That's right.
And with that, if there's nothing else, keep an eye out for game nights on Discord and my talk next month about all things crypto. Well, not really, but let's just call it that. Other than that, take it easy, guys.
See ya.
Bye.